Hello friends, Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to our latest episode. In this video, we're going to discuss the strange disappearance of Asha Kramer. Join me. Let's take a walk and see. Now, we come across many strange vanishings and disappearances on this channel, some in the woods and others while the person is going about their regular lives. When something happens to a person in the woods or even when they're abducted, it's a little easier to understand how something like that could have happened. In most of these cases of abduction, at least there are almost always clues to follow, and sometimes even an eyewitness to the event. However, when someone who is in the middle of a possible mental break or who is already having emotional trouble, it's hard to imagine how they could slip off the face of the earth, leaving no clues behind, and unreliable witness statements at best, and extremely confusing at worst. That's just some of what we're dealing with here in this case about the extremely bizarre and very concerning case of the vanishing of Asha Kramer. In 2015, a 26-year-old woman named Asha Kramer was living with her boyfriend, Jemai Gale, in Albion, California. Asha was an Australian national, and by all accounts, she was living her best life, and she and Jemai were a happy couple together, devoted to each other. There were no known problems or issues in the relationship, and all seemed perfectly normal. However, in September that same year, Asha is reported to have started showing signs of some mental disturbance. She would suddenly and without warning scream at the top of her lungs, shout and rant, and would also go into just as sudden convulsions. She would refuse to eat or sleep for days at a time, staying up and starving herself for as long as she possibly could, or as long, it's said, as her body would let her. She was also constantly slipping in and out of catatonic trances. According to her live-in boyfriend, Jemai, around this time she also began discussing some vague childhood traumas she claims happened to her, but she would never elaborate on what, and when asked, she would either shut down or fly into a blind rage. He was concerned for her welfare, understandably, and this, combined with her going 4 straight days without eating, forced him to bring her in for an evaluation at a local mental health facility. Asha had no previous history of having any sort of mental health issues, and even though there was a bit of history of it in her family, she had never shown any signs of anything like this up until this point. When nothing was found to be physically wrong with her, the mental health doctors all concluded that she was indeed suffering from some sort of psychotic break and possibly a, quote, manic bipolar episode, end quote. Now, the staff at this institution deemed her not to be a danger to herself or others, though, and despite them finding she was experiencing a mental health crisis, they released her back into the custody of her boyfriend, who had no choice but to take her back home with him. This was the beginning of what would end up being an extremely strange and bizarre and still unsolved disappearance. The issues seemed to continue right from the hospital when she was released, because her boyfriend reported that while driving home, she randomly confessed she had cheated on him and then proceeded to try and jump from the moving vehicle. Despite all of this, the two made it back to their apartment, and Jemai was relieved when one of Asha's lifelong friends from Australia decided to come to California to visit, and he was hoping that maybe seeing and spending time with this friend, whose name was Sally Scales, would help bring Asha out of whatever this was that she was going through. Once home, Asha started confessing to murdering her neighbor, who was very much alive at the time. She was refusing to sleep, and that very night, burning a piece of paper and trying several times to start her car. It's unknown what the paper was she was burning and why she was unable to start her car, but her efforts were for naught. At one point during the night, after being released to the custody of her boyfriend, he and Asha's best friend Sally found her outside, and after searching for her for a few minutes, they found her standing very still behind a tree. She had been watching them search for her the whole time, but hadn't said a word or moved at all. On another occasion, while her friend was still visiting and staying with her and Jemai, she went outside in the middle of the night and started running full speed away from the two of them, and they couldn't catch up with her. She eventually came back, though, that same night, and explained she had simply felt like running. Throughout all of this insanity, she was also refusing to eat and was said to be generally acting bizarrely and completely out of character. The morning after the running incident, both Jemai and Sally thought it would be good to get Asha out of the house during the daytime and let her get some fresh air in order to maybe help her get her head straight again. They wanted her to go back to being the young and vibrant woman they knew so well and loved so much. The three of them got into the car and embarked on the approximately 3-hour drive from Albion to San Francisco to see Asha's mother. The hope was that seeing her mother would help to put her life into perspective again, ease her mind, and bring her out of whatever it was in her mind that was causing this funk. It was a lofty hope and a shot in the dark for sure, but he didn't know what else to do, and Sally agreed that this was a good idea. Little did they know, though, that this one well-meaning decision would change the course of all three of their lives forever and be the start of a mystery that still continues to this very day. At some point early on in their trip, they all stopped to have breakfast at a place called the Rollerville Cafe, which was near Point Arena in Flumeville. While at the table and ordering their food, Asha refused to speak or make eye contact with the waitress and wouldn't touch her meal. Jemai and Sally decided not to leave, despite Asha's odd behavior, because she wasn't being overly obnoxious, she was simply acting strangely, which by now they were becoming somewhat used to, unfortunately. During their meal, Sally excused herself to go to the ladies' room and walked in that direction. A minute or so later, Asha said she also had to go to the restroom and got up, seemingly following closely behind her best friend. After a few minutes had passed, Sally returned to the table without Asha. When Jemai asked where Asha was, Sally told him that Asha had never come into the restroom at all, and she didn't know where she'd gone. Jemai was sure Asha had gone in the direction of the restroom, but when he and Sally went back to look for her, she wasn't in there and nowhere inside at all. The restaurant staff and even some of the other customers helped the two of them search the general vicinity and surrounding areas for Asha, but to no avail. And despite being called almost immediately, the authorities didn't have any more luck. No one could find Asha, and no one had any idea where she possibly could have gone. It's another case of someone being there one moment and gone the next, disappeared in the blink of an eye. After searching in and around the restaurant, the police expanded their search efforts, and when they did, they found their first clue. On a trail near the Point Arena lighthouse, they found Asha's jacket, discarded and lying there on the side of the trail. The first thought of everyone involved was that, perhaps due to her recent mental state, Asha had jumped to her death into the dark and rough sea below the lighthouse itself. However, there was never any evidence to corroborate this. No sign she'd approached the ledge, and no body ever washed up. Other clues soon turned up, but each one seemed to only further confuse the mystery. Asha's cell phone was eventually found in some bushes near the home she shared with Jemai, and it was later found that 2 messages had been deleted from it. This seems to have been done very close to when she disappeared, but the authorities could never tell if her phone or the deleted messages had anything to do with her disappearance, and the contents of those messages have never been released to the public. Several witnesses did come forward, claiming to have seen a woman matching Asha's description on or near the day she disappeared, but sadly, none of these sightings could ever be confirmed as actually being Asha. One witness came forward and said he had seen Asha at the beach on the day she disappeared, and another person claimed to have seen her in a grocery store 4 days after she'd gone missing. Despite the authorities working tirelessly on this case, and her family continuing their search, never giving up hope, no new leads or clues have ever come up or been found. Many people familiar with this case agree that the extreme shifts in Asha's personality, plus the fact that she seems to have disappeared right before the eyes of not just her boyfriend and her best friend Sally, but of many other potential witnesses in the form of customers at the restaurant that day. There are several theories, and as we go through some of them, please keep in mind that no one has ever been charged with anything relating to her disappearance, and there's never been any mention by the authorities of any sort of foul play. The most widespread theory is that Asha's boyfriend was involved somehow in her disappearance. Again, this is unsubstantiated. No one has been named as a suspect or a person of interest. Many people put a lot of stock in the fact that her cell phone was found, with messages recently deleted, in the bushes near her home not long after her disappearance. With Asha's state of mind in the time leading up to the disappearance and how many times she was caught hiding in the bushes or running around in her night clothes, the authorities haven't named anyone as a person of interest, and it's in the end unknown whether or not this theory holds much water. Another theory is that perhaps she had a full-blown psychotic break and perhaps suffered some form of amnesia due to the seeming severity of her mental state leading up to the time she disappeared. Is Asha out there somewhere, wandering around not knowing who or perhaps even where she is? This is thought to be the best case scenario, and if it is true, we hope that by spreading the word about her strange and tragic disappearance, perhaps someone, somewhere, will come across her and realize who she is. There's also a lot of speculation regarding where Asha's jacket was found the day she disappeared, and some people who put weight on this clue think perhaps she did take her own life right there at the lighthouse. Maybe she did it unknowingly and thought in her frazzled and confused state of mind that she was just going for a swim. Maybe, though, if she did go into the water, she did it on purpose. There's just no way of really knowing. One more theory is that Asha wandered off on purpose to start a new life somewhere, as the pressures of her relationship and everything else she was going through and dealing with in her life got to her, and she just doesn't want to be found. Her family and those who knew her best, though, say this isn't possible, and that if Asha had done this, in seeing how much her loved ones were and still are suffering, she would have, at the very least, reached out to at least one of them. Could she have just wandered off and come across someone who had less than honorable intentions? Again, like everything else we mentioned here, it is a possibility, however unlikely it may be. Regardless of all the theories, thoughts, and speculations, the mystery certainly remains. Well, friends, there you have it. What do you think of this strange disappearance? I look forward to your comments, but please keep it friendly and respectful. Till we meet again, be good to yourselves and each other. Stay safe out there. As for me, I'll see you a little farther on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time. Hold your animals close and tell them I said hi.